There are two moments in modern history when the world should have ended. Not metaphorically, not it was a very bad situation. Literally, two moments when nuclear weapons were within minutes of being fired, where the chain reaction of retaliation would have killed hundreds of millions of people, possibly ended human civilization as we know it. Both times, one person stopped it. And in both cases, almost nobody knows their name. This is their story. And it's not taught in schools, not because it isn't important, but because what it reveals about how close we came is almost too uncomfortable to sit with. In October 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis. For 13 days, the United States and the Soviet Union were locked in most dangerous standoff in human history. Soviet nuclear missiles had been secretly installed in Cuba, 90 miles from American soil. Kennedy had ordered a naval blockade. The world was watching and waiting. What the world did not know, what the American government did not know, was that the 4 Soviet submarines were operating in those waters, each one armed with a nuclear torpedo. Submarine B-59 had been submerged for days. The ventilation system had failed. The temperature inside the boat had reached 50 degrees Celsius, hotter than the hottest day ever recorded in Death Valley. Carbon dioxide levels were rising. Crew members were losing consciousness at their stations, and they had been completely cut off from Moscow for days. They had no idea World War III had already started or whether it had started. Then the depth charges started. 11 US Navy destroyers and the aircraft carrier USS Randolph had located B-59 and were dropping depth charges to force it to surface. What Americans did not know, what they had failed to communicate, was that there were small signaling charges. But those were small signaling charges, not an attack, just a signal. Surface and identify yourself. Inside B-59, the crew believed they were under attack. They believed the war had begun. The captain, Valentin Savitsky, ordered a nuclear torpedo armed and readied. He reportedly said, and these words have been verified by crew testimony, "We would die, but we would sink them all. We would not become a shame to the fleet." To fire, he needed authorization from 2 other officers on board. The political officer agreed. The third officer, a flotilla commander named Vasily Arkhipov, said no. Arkhipov had authority over Savitsky. He had ranked him as the chief of staff of the entire submarine flotilla, and he used that authority. He argued in a shaking, oxygen-depleted submarine, in 50-degree heat with men passing out around him, that the depth charges were a signal, not an attack. That surfacing was the correct move. That firing a nuclear weapon at the most powerful naval force on Earth would not save them. It would end the world. Savitsky listened. The B-59 surfaced. The standoff ended. The next day, Kennedy and Khrushchev agreed an agreement. The Cuban Missile Crisis was over. The submarine breaks the surface, downlights the ocean. One man, one decision, one submarine. Thomas Blanton, Director of National Security Archive, has said that Arkhipov saved the world. In 2017, the Future of Life Institute gave his family the inaugural Future of Life Award and $50,000. Arkhipov himself died in 1998. For most of his life, what he had done was classified. 21 years later, the Cold War is still running. Relations between the United States and the Soviet Union are, if anything, worse than they were during Cuba. President Reagan has called the USSR an evil empire. NATO is running military exercises near Soviet borders. Both sides have nuclear arsenals capable of destroying the planet several times over. Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov is 44 years old. He's covering a shift for a sick colleague at Sepukov 15, a top-secret early warning facility outside Moscow that monitors the American missile launches via satellite. He's not supposed to be there that night. He swapped in for someone else. At just past midnight, every alarm in the facility went off simultaneously. The screens showed an incoming nuclear missile from the United States, then another, then another, then another, then a fifth. 5 intercontinental ballistic missiles inbound impact in minutes. Protocol was clear. Petrov was required to immediately report the attack to his superiors. up the chain of command. His superiors would alert Soviet leadership, the Soviet leadership would authorize a retaliatory nuclear strike. The entire sequence from his reports to nuclear weapons being fired at American cities would take minutes. Petrov had 10 minutes to decide. He sat at his console, the alarm squinting, his colleagues looking at him, and he thought something was wrong. If the United States were launching a nuclear-first strike, truly trying to destroy the Soviet Union, they would not send 5 missiles, they would send hundreds. Simultaneously, an attack designed to wipe out Soviet retaliatory capability before it could respond. 5 missiles made no strategic sense. He also knew the satellite system, he had helped write code for it. He knew it was prone to error. So he picked up the phone. He reported to his superiors on record, with his career and possibly his freedom on the line, that the alarm was a malfunction, a false alert. He had no proof. He had the gut feeling and logical argument, that was all. He was right. The satellite system had misidentified sunlight reflecting off high-altitude clouds as missile launches, a technical flaw in the OCO satellite network. 5 Phantom missiles did not exist. If Petrov had followed protocol, if he had reported it as a genuine attack, as he was trained to do, as the system told him to do, the Soviet Union would have almost certainly have launched a retaliatory nuclear strike within the hour. The United States would have responded, and the war that exists today would not. That is what nearly ended human civilization, sunlight reflecting off clouds. Petrov was not celebrated. He was reprimanded gently for failing to properly document the incident in his log. He was transferred to a less sensitive posting. He retired quietly. For years, almost no one outside Soviet military knew what had happened that night. Arkhipov's role in the Cuban Missile Crisis was similarly buried. The American government did not learn officially that the B-59 had carried a nuclear torpedo and had come within 1 vote of firing it onto a conference in 2002. 40 years after the event. Robert McNamara, who had been Kennedy's Secretary of Defense during the crisis, heard the full account of the B-59 incident for the first time at that conference. He later said it was, and this is a direct quote, horrifying. He had spent 40 years believing in the Cuban Missile Crisis had been managed with near-perfect control on both sides. What he learned in 2002 was that the world had been saved not by perfect management, but by one man in boiling submarine saying no. Both Arkhipov and Petrov made their decisions alone, without orders from above, without certainty, without any guarantee they were right. They made them because something in their judgment told them that the alternative was worse. That is not a system working correctly. That is a system being saved by a person inside it. Here's the number that sits underneath both of these stories. At the peak of the Cold War, the United States and Soviet Union together held approximately 70,000 nuclear warheads, 70,000, each one capable of destroying a city, many of them pointed at population centers, most of them are hair-trigger alerts, meaning they could be launched within minutes of a perceived attack. The system that controlled those weapons was designed by human beings. It was operated by human beings. It was dependent at critical moments on the judgment of individual humans working on that extreme pressure with incomplete information. And in the 2 most dangerous moments we know about, the system said fire and 2 men said no. What we do not know is how many moments like that there were that we have never heard about. What we do not know is whether the same system, different people, different day, different pressure would produce the same result. Arkhipov and Petrov did not think of themselves as heroes. Both were known to be uncomfortable when described that way. Petrov said in an interview nearly the end of his life that he had simply done his job, that the decision had not felt heroic, it had not felt like the only logical conclusion from the available evidence. He also said this, "I was just at the right place at the right time." The war exists because the right man was covering a shift for a sick colleague on a random Tuesday in September 1983, and because another man refused to fire a torpedo in the dark, in the heat, when everyone around him wanted to. The day the world almost ended twice is not in most history textbooks. It's not in the standard curriculum. It's not in the list of things we'll teach children about the Cold War, maybe because it's harder to process than a victory or a defeat. It's a near miss, a story that ends well only because of decisions no system required and no one could guarantee. The world you're living in right now, the one where those cities were not destroyed, where those wars were not fought, exists because two ordinary men made extraordinary calls. You probably never heard of them. Now you have. There are more stories like this, more moments nobody told you about. That's what this channel is for. See you in the next one.